He didn't grab anyone. He didn't assault anyone. He didn't say a single word to the women he targeted. But what he did was enough to leave thousands of women shaken, furious, and asking the same haunting question. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. How dangerous can someone be without ever laying a hand on you? This is the disturbing case of Calese Crowder, a registered sex offender whose silent, predatory behavior began surfacing in harmless places. Bookstores, pharmacies, and department stores. Places women assume are safe, until videos started proving otherwise. And the moment his behavior went viral, dozens of women suddenly realized they had experienced the same nightmare and never knew the man behind it. But to understand how this case spiraled into one of California's most unsettling patterns of non-contact sexual misconduct, we need to start where millions of people first saw him. A young woman browsing books, a stranger drifting behind her, a camera filming what her eyes couldn't see, and a viral video that would expose something much bigger than anyone expected. On a seemingly normal day in August 2023, TikTok creator Michaela Witter hit record on what she thought would be a wholesome update for her followers. Day 20 of 100 days of Pilates, Barnes & Noble, Starbucks, self-care errands. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Just another vlog. But as she moved through the aisles of the bookstore, she felt something. A man watching her. Not a glance, not a casual look, but the kind of stare that makes your skin crawl before you even understand why. At first, she ignored it. Women are conditioned to. But the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. Every time she turned down a new aisle, he appeared again. Not beside her, not in front of her, but behind her, almost as if he was testing how close he could get without being noticed. So Michaela, unsettled but calm, began recording on her phone, just in case. She had no idea that what she captured would eventually identify a man police say has been repeating the same behavior for years, far beyond that one trip to Barnes & Noble. In the video, Michaela holds her phone low as she pretends to browse. She walks slowly. He walks slowly. She pauses. He pauses. Then the moment that made millions freeze, the man crouches behind her, pretending to tie his shoes. Except, he wasn't tying anything. Her camera caught him leaning forward, placing his head near her backside, inhaling deeply. When she confronted him with a trembling voice, "What are you doing?" He didn't respond. Not a word. Not an explanation. Just silence. Silence that somehow made the moment even more disturbing. Michaela left the store immediately, shaken. She told staff what happened. Her hands were shaking as she drove home. She said in her later videos that even though he never touched her, she felt deeply violated. She uploaded the video that night. By morning, it had exploded. Within hours, her inbox filled with messages. Not from trolls. Not from people calling it harmless. But from other women who recognized the same man. "He followed me at a Target last year. He did that to me at Walgreens. I thought I imagined it. That same guy was sniffing me at the grocery store. He crouched behind my daughter." Some reports went as far back as 2021. The viral video didn't create the predator. It exposed him. But who was he? The internet didn't have to wait long for an answer. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Glendale police confirmed that the man in Michaela's video was 38-year-old Calese Crowder, a registered sex offender with a criminal history involving peeping and stalking behavior. To many viewers, this wasn't just creepy. It was predatory, calculated, patterned. And according to police records, this wasn't the first time he had been in trouble. But what happened next confirmed something even more alarming. For Crowder, this behavior wasn't new, and it wasn't isolated. As the video gained traction, another voice joined the conversation. One that made the case explode into national news. Candace Horry, wife of former NBA star Robert Horry, said her family had dealt with Crowder more than a decade earlier. She claimed he stalked their teenage daughter when she was only 14. She described him as persistent and unsettling. She said the fear he caused their family stayed with them. Her story didn't contradict anything police had said. It only raised one terrifying thought. If this behavior had been happening for more than 10 years, What else had he done that no one had ever caught? Within a week of Michaela's footage going viral, Crowder was arrested. Not for the bookstore incident, because legally, sniffing isn't categorized as sexual assault unless physical touching or exposure occurs. Instead, he was arrested for peeping into a family's home with children inside. The charges: loitering with intent, peeping, violating his parole as a registered sex offender. He was jailed on a $10,000 bail. But even this arrest didn't stop the cycle. Even after pleading no contest, his sentence was just 60 days in jail. And after serving that, he was free. Free to go back into public spaces. Free to walk aisles behind unsuspecting shoppers. Free to continue a pattern years in the making. A pattern that law enforcement, prosecutors, and legal experts all admit is extremely difficult to stop, because technically he wasn't touching anyone. And yet, the danger felt real. But the worst part was still coming. Because 2024 would prove that the viral video didn't mark an ending. It marked a beginning. One that would show the pattern was far from over. When Crowder walked out of jail after serving his sentence, police hoped the public attention alone would make him think twice. But it didn't. Just months later, he surfaced again. At a different store in a different city with a different woman who felt the same cold dread Michaela felt that day in Barnes & Noble. And this time, it wouldn't end with a confrontation caught on camera. It would end with another police call and Crowder running. The officers working the Barnes & Noble complaint knew exactly what they were looking for. They had handled cases like this before, cases where the behavior wasn't violent in the traditional sense, yet still left victims shaken in ways that were hard to explain to anyone who hadn't lived through it. But as they dug into the suspect's name, Calese Crowder, they quickly realized this wasn't a typical first-time offender. This was a man with history, a long one. While the public only learned his name in 2023, his pattern had begun years earlier. And the most unsettling part? People had tried to sound the alarm long before things reached this point. Long before a viral video caught him crouching behind a woman's legs between the bookshelves, Crowder had been in and out of the system for sexual offense-related behavior. Court records show he had been arrested multiple times. Offenses involving sexual battery, sexual gratification without consent, prowling, peeping, and other forms of predatory conduct. The type of behavior that often looks minor on paper but is anything but harmless. Psychologists call this kind of offender a progressive opportunist. Someone who starts with boundary violations that seem small and escalates. Someone who tests limits. Someone who gets bolder with every time they get away with it. And for years, Crowder had been getting away with it. Not because police didn't take complaints seriously, but because the laws themselves were outdated, vague, or filled with loopholes that made prosecution difficult unless physical contact or undeniable evidence existed. That's the terrifying reality the general public rarely sees. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Multiple women had come forward over the years. Some of their stories never made the news. Some ended with no charges because the offender fled the scene before police arrived. Some ended with a citation instead of a misdemeanor. Some ended with charges dropped due to lack of evidence. And yet the complaints kept coming, almost always describing the same behavior. Following women, crouching behind them, recording them secretly, getting far too close inside stores, acting sexually aroused in public spaces. These weren't misunderstandings. These weren't accidental encounters. This was a pattern. One woman stated that she went to authorities after catching a man, later identified as Crowder, positioning himself behind her while she was shopping. She didn't know what he was doing until she turned and saw him quickly stand up. She described the moment as creepy and deeply violating. But because he never touched her, she was essentially told the same thing countless women hear. "We can't do much unless he harms you." It's a sentence that haunts victims for years. And as investigators began piecing together the timeline surrounding the Barnes & Noble incident, they started noticing something else. The complaints were becoming more frequent. After the viral 2023 video, many assumed Crowder would be deterred. Public humiliation alone can sometimes push offenders into stopping their behavior. But in this case, the opposite happened. By 2024, New reports began coming in from different stores across the area, each one describing a man who matched Crowder's appearance and behavior. One incident involved a woman who noticed a man trailing her through a store aisle, not close enough to touch her, but close enough to make every instinct in her body scream that something was wrong. When she looked behind her, he quickly turned away. When she moved to another aisle, he showed up minutes later. When she tried to leave, he followed at a distance. She later said it felt like her fight or flight response was malfunctioning, because logically she knew she should leave, but emotionally she felt trapped, frozen by the subtlety of the threat. He never touched her. He never said a word. But his presence, his movements, the way he stayed behind her, it was calculated. Another woman came forward after seeing his name on the news and recognizing him instantly. She said she had an encounter with him months earlier and remembered how uncomfortable she felt. She didn't file a police report at the time because she feared no one would take it seriously. That's the saddest part. Far more victims exist than the number of reports suggest. As these reports stacked up, investigators realized they weren't dealing with a random one-time voyeur. They were tracking a man whose behavior was escalating across multiple locations. Crowder wasn't choosing victims based on location, age, or appearance. His behavior was opportunity-based. Wherever he felt he could get away with it, he tried. Police pieced together patterns. The incidents almost always happened in retail environments. He often chose aisles with shelves tall enough to hide behind. His behavior took place in moments when victims were alone, even for just a few seconds. He often crouched low to the ground, using angles to get close without being noticed immediately. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't an innocent man in the wrong place. This was deliberate predatory behavior. And in 2024, that pattern finally reached a point police could no longer ignore. In 2024, officers responded to yet another complaint, this time at a different store. The victim described nearly the exact same behavior as in previous incidents. A man crouching behind her, attempting to get close to her lower body, moving with her through aisles even when she changed direction. When officers arrived and reviewed footage, the man seen matched Crowder exactly. This time, there was enough evidence, video, witnesses, and a clear identification. He was arrested on charges including peeping, prowling, and annoying or molesting a minor, charges that reflect the sexualized nature of his actions, even without physical contact. But even as officers filled out the paperwork, they knew the truth. These charges wouldn't keep him locked up for long. The law simply didn't view his behavior through the same lens the victims did. And that is what scared investigators the most. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. As the story reached more people, legal experts stepped in to explain why cases like this are so difficult. One former prosecutor emphasized how sexual crimes without direct contact fall into a gray area legally. You know exactly what he's doing. The victim knows exactly what he's doing. The officers know exactly what he's doing. But unless you get the right angle on video or he admits it, charges are limited. That's why offenders like Crowder often slip through cracks. Why victims feel unprotected. Why even after multiple arrests, the system struggles to intervene effectively. Experts also warned that behavior like this rarely stops on its own. And that warning would become painfully relevant again soon. Because while Crowder was facing charges for multiple incidents, investigators were about to discover something deeply disturbing. A new complaint linked to him that suggested his behavior had escalated again. And what they found next would change the entire direction of the case. Investigators were still processing the paperwork from Crowder's latest arrest when another complaint came in. One that immediately stood out. Not because the description was different, but because this time the victim was much younger. The caller was a parent who reported a man behaving suspiciously around their teenage daughter inside a retail store. The father had noticed a man crouching close behind the girl as she browsed a lower shelf. And when she moved, the man repositioned himself again, keeping his body low to the ground. It was the exact same behavior officers had seen in multiple reports. The same pattern, the same calculated positioning. But this time, the victim was a minor, and that detail changed everything. When officers reviewed the store's surveillance footage, Their worst suspicion was confirmed. The man matched Calese Crowder. Up to this point, Crowder's known behavior had targeted adult women. But the incident involving the minor shifted the tone of the entire investigation. It suggested an escalation not just in frequency but in risk. A predator who begins seeking out vulnerable victims is someone investigators cannot afford to ignore. The footage painted an unsettling picture. Crowder entering the store alone, keeping his distance at first, watching the teen from another aisle, slowly getting closer, crouching when she bent down, shifting his angle each time she moved. He never spoke to her. He never touched her. He didn't need to. Predators like him often rely on proximity rather than contact, using physical closeness as a form of sexual gratification. For investigators, this wasn't simply odd behavior. It was a red flag, a sign that the offender was growing bolder, more careless, and more willing to target younger victims. This was no longer a case about awkward or creepy behavior in public spaces. This was a man whose predatory inclinations were advancing. After the teen's father pulled her away and alerted store employees, the man fled. But as investigators analyzed the footage, a troubling question surfaced. Had Crowder targeted minors before? And if so, how many incidents went unreported? Victims rarely report these encounters. Many feel embarrassed, unsure, or afraid they won't be believed. And when minors are involved, the likelihood of silence is even higher, either because they don't recognize the danger or because parents don't fully understand what happened. Detectives went through past complaints again, reading them with new eyes. They searched for patterns involving younger victims, checking for vague descriptions that might have been overlooked. While no definitive earlier minor victims surfaced in the paper trail, detectives knew what every expert knows. If an offender is willing to target a minor once, it is almost never the first time, and almost certainly not the last. By this time, local news outlets had already begun covering the series of complaints tied to Crowder. When the new report involving the teenage girl surfaced, the public response intensified. The idea that a man was creeping behind unsuspecting women in bookstores and retail aisles was disturbing enough. But the idea that he was now targeting minors brought fear to an entirely different level. Parents demanded answers. Shoppers recorded and shared their experiences. Survivors from previous encounters began speaking out. One woman said she saw Crowder months earlier in a store, hovering too close, crouching as she moved. She didn't understand what he was doing at the time, but she felt violated. When she saw his name in the news, everything clicked. Another woman described feeling embarrassed for years about her own experience because she couldn't articulate what happened. Seeing others come forward helped her understand that she hadn't imagined it. She had been targeted. These testimonies gave investigators something that surveillance footage couldn't: a clear picture of how long Crowder had been operating under the radar. As more victims came forward, prosecutors began explaining the challenges in pursuing charges against offenders like Crowder. Without physical contact, many states categorize this behavior under lesser offenses like prowling, peeping, disorderly conduct, invasion of privacy, maintaining a place for sexual acts without consent. These are charges that can lead to fines or short jail stays, but rarely long-term imprisonment. Legal experts pointed out that, in cases like this, the law often lags behind reality. The public sees a predator. Victims experience trauma. Investigators recognize a pattern. But the legal system sees misdemeanors. This mismatch is what enables offenders like Crowder to slip in and out of custody, continuing their behavior with minimal obstacles. And while many offenders remain harmless creepers, others escalate, sometimes dramatically. Investigators couldn't yet say where Crowder fell on that spectrum, but the signs were pointing in a dangerous direction. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. When detectives dug deeper into Crowder's history, they found a series of past arrests that echoed the incidents now unfolding: sexual battery, sexual gratification without consent, prowling, peeping, disorderly conduct linked to sexualized behavior. Together, they formed a disturbing portrait of someone whose behavior had been building over years, not months. It wasn't that he was suddenly becoming a predator, it was that he was finally being caught. Even more concerning was the consistency in his actions. Predators who display the same behavior across multiple incidents often have deeply ingrained patterns. They don't simply stop, they evolve. And in Crowder's case, investigators feared that the shift toward targeting a minor was evidence of that evolution. After the latest report, officers obtained search authority related to Crowder's activities and living situation. While details released publicly were limited, police confirmed that what they found reinforced their concerns about the sexual motivation behind his actions. Though no violent materials or kidnapping-related items were found, investigators did discover evidence consistent with voyeuristic behavior. This included items indicating he had an increased obsession with watching women, specifically in public spaces where they assumed they were safe. For detectives, this discovery was confirmation of what they already suspected. Crowder's crimes were intentional, sexual, and escalating. He wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaken. He wasn't simply awkward or socially off. He was driven by a compulsion, and compulsions do not die quietly. When Crowder returned to court for the newer charges, including prowling, peeping, and annoying or molesting a minor, the judge found himself staring at a defendant with a long, concerning history. But as with many cases of voyeuristic offending, the law provided only limited tools. Crowder could be held. He could be charged. But he could not be kept indefinitely, not unless prosecutors uncovered something more serious. This placed the judge in a morally difficult position. A man with a known pattern was standing before him, and yet the law restricted how far he could go in protecting the public. Crowder was ordered to follow restrictions. He was given boundaries, but boundaries only work if the offender respects them. And this was a man who had ignored boundaries for years. Investigators left the courtroom with a strong sense of unease. They knew this was far from over. They had seen too many cases like this, cases where the system tried to intervene but lacked the leverage to stop the offender entirely. Their fear wasn't whether Crowder would reoffend. It was when, and that question was answered sooner and more disturbingly than anyone expected. Because within days, investigators received another report. This one from a location no one anticipated. And what they found in the footage sent a chill through every person working the case. The new report arrived on a weekday afternoon, filed by an employee at yet another retail store. At first glance, it looked like every other complaint tied to Crowder. A suspicious male crouching behind female customers. But what made this one different was the specific note added by the store security officer. Behavior appears more deliberate and sustained than previous incidents. Investigators, already familiar with Crowder's tendencies, pulled the footage expecting to see more of the same pattern. Instead, they saw something worse. The video opened with a wide shot of a busy aisle. Several customers browsed without noticing the man lingering near the end cap. He wasn't pretending to shop this time. He wasn't holding a book or a product as camouflage. He was simply watching. His body was angled just slightly toward a woman who was browsing alone. As she bent down to look at a lower shelf, he moved, slow, steady, intentional, until he was positioned just feet behind her. And then, like clockwork, he crouched. The same crouch seen in store after store. The same method that had terrified women for months. The same behavior that had already led to multiple arrests. But what made this footage stand out was the duration. He didn't dart away when other customers walked by. He didn't flinch when the woman shifted. He stayed there, locked in, completely absorbed. For nearly 40 seconds, he remained in that position. In the world of predatory behavior, 40 seconds is an eternity. Investigators had grown used to short bursts of disturbing footage. Quick crouches, brief approaches, sudden retreats. But this was different. This was commitment. This was escalation in its purest form, not in violence, but in boldness. Crowder no longer seemed concerned about being caught. And that was the most dangerous sign of all. When the woman finally sensed a presence behind her and turned, the footage captured a moment that chilled investigators. Crowder didn't panic. He didn't jump up. He didn't run. He slowly rose to his feet, eyes wide, breathing heavy. Startled, but not ashamed. The victim, startled, stepped back immediately. She later said she felt an instant wave of fear because she hadn't heard him approach at all. She hadn't even realized someone was behind her until she physically turned around and saw him standing inches away. The store employee who watched the footage with detectives shook his head. He wasn't shopping, the employee said. He was hunting. And while the term was dramatic, investigators couldn't deny that the behavior fit. Crowder wasn't browsing. He wasn't confused. He was intentionally positioning himself for his own gratification. And the fact that he stayed even when people were in the aisle meant one thing. He no longer cared about getting caught. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. After reviewing the footage, detectives contacted prosecutors immediately. Everyone involved agreed this was the strongest evidence yet of Crowder's pattern and intent. But the legal system has strict boundaries. Intent is difficult to prove, and voyeuristic, predatory behavior without physical contact is classified differently from hands-on offenses. The charges available remained the same: prowling, peeping, annoying or molesting a minor from the earlier case, disorderly conduct, all misdemeanors, all limited in penalty, all insufficient to keep someone like Crowder confined long-term. And prosecutors knew something else. Crowder understood these limitations better than anyone. His history showed that he adapted quickly, modified his approach, avoided contact when necessary, and operated in the gray area between disturbing and prosecutable. It was a loophole he had been exploiting for years. When Crowder returned to court for the new charges, the judge acknowledged the seriousness of the behavior. He addressed Crowder directly, stating that his actions were predatory, frightening, and dangerous. But he also made a grim admission. The court is limited in the penalties it can impose for these offenses. For victims, this was devastating. For the public, infuriating. For investigators, exhausting. Crowder was ordered to stay away from the victims, avoid specific locations, comply with sex offender requirements, and follow restrictive behavioral guidelines. But everyone in the room knew something uncomfortable. Restrictions only work if the offender respects them. And Crowder's record showed he didn't. There was only one hope left: the possibility of enhanced penalties if prosecutors could tie together his pattern into a larger case demonstrating repeated sexual motivation. They began assembling everything: the footage, the timelines, interviews, complaints, previous arrests, statements from victims, psychological indicators, expert testimony on compulsive voyeuristic behavior. Their goal wasn't to exaggerate the case, but to properly frame it. This was not a series of isolated events. This was a pattern of sexual predation. As news outlets began reporting on the full scope of the case, victims who had remained silent felt empowered to come forward. One woman said she had dismissed her own experience for months, unsure if anyone would take it seriously. Seeing others speak gave her the courage to add her voice. Another victim said she had never been more terrified than the moment she turned and saw him crouched behind her. She described the moment as feeling violated without being touched. Their stories became impossible to ignore. Their collective voices forced people to confront the severity of Crowder's behavior. Even if the law couldn't impose long sentences, the court of public opinion delivered its own verdict. Psychologists who reviewed the case noted something deeply concerning. Crowder's behavior did not appear accidental, impulsive, or disorganized. It was patterned. It was ritualized. It was sexually motivated. And the more he did it, the more emboldened he became. His final captured incident, remaining crouched for nearly a full minute, showed a man who had crossed from impulsive voyeurism into compulsive predation. Experts warned that without meaningful intervention, people like Crowder often continue these patterns indefinitely. Not every offender escalates to violence, but many escalate in persistence, boldness, and frequency. Crowder's case proved that firsthand. The legal merry-go-round continued throughout the summer of 2025. Crowder was arrested multiple times in July and August for similar incidents at stores like Nordstrom Rack, Walmart, and Walgreens. Each time, he was charged with a misdemeanor like loitering with intent to commit a crime and released shortly after on bail or due to credits for time served. But in September 2025, authorities found a different leverage point: his parole status. The supervising agency filed a petition for revocation of parole supervision, alleging that Crowder repeatedly failed to comply with the strict conditions of his release. A judge found probable cause to support the revocation. Calese Carron Crowder is currently in custody, held without bail by the California Department of Corrections as a parole violator. While the underlying new charges were minor misdemeanors, the parole violation allows authorities to keep him off the streets for a longer, more secure period, finally breaking the cycle of rapid releases. The case has intensified the conversation around closing loopholes in California's voyeurism and lewd conduct laws, as victims and police were vocal about the justice system neglecting everything while he remained free despite repeated offenses. A gap that allowed a known offender to continue targeting women for years. A gap that left victims shaken, unheard, or told nothing could be done. A gap that proved how dangerous non-contact crimes can truly be. This is not a story about a violent attack. It's not a story about kidnapping or assault. It's a story about something more insidious. A predator who used the anonymity of public spaces to violate women in plain sight. A system that struggled to keep pace with a pattern that didn't fit neatly into traditional legal categories. And victims whose experiences were minimized because the offender never laid a hand on them. But violation doesn't always require touch. And danger doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like a man crouching behind you in a bookstore aisle. Sometimes it looks like a predator hiding in everyday places. Sometimes it looks like a system unprepared for people who weaponize loopholes. And that is what makes the Calese Crowder case unforgettable. It forces one uncomfortable question. If this is what a predator can get away with in public, what else slips through the cracks? And as always, you've been watching True Crime Story Vault, where every case is examined with facts, clarity, and respect for the people affected. If you want to see more deep-dive true crime investigations like this one, make sure you subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, the truth always finds its way to the surface.